In this video, we are going to take a look if you should be taking South Carolina or the field for entertainment purposes only. Before we start, if you like the content, then please consider subscribing to the channel and giving the video a like. Now let's get into this. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but DraftKings has a prop bet where you can take South Carolina at minus 150 or take the field, the entire field, at plus 120. Now, if you are not happy putting your money down on plus 120 for the field, then you can go over to the futures and there's several options. Iowa is plus 750, LSU plus 850, UConn plus 1200, Texas plus 1400, Stanford plus 1500, USC, I like that one, plus 2,500, and UCLA as well, plus 2,500. Now, I am not sure which one of those you like, but it would be better value than South Carolina at minus 150. Or is it? That is what we are going to debate. Of the Sweet 16 game, South Carolina is obviously the most favored. They are plus 15.5. The next highest favorite is UConn, who's plus 8.5. But if we just stay on the South Carolina side of the bracket, so there's Oregon State going against Notre Dame, with Notre Dame being a 3-point favorite. And then you have the weakest regional, Portland 4, with Texas being a 5.5 favorite over Gonzaga, and Stanford being minus 4.5 over North Carolina State. By the way, look out for Gonzaga over Texas, but don't put money on this. This is for entertainment purposes only. Don't put the college fund on any tips that I get. They're doomed for failure. But when I look at South Carolina's side of the bracket, I'm wondering, it makes the minus 150 for South Carolina look very intriguing. As a win in the Sweet 16 almost seems like a certainty, as Indiana's biggest threat, Mackenzie Holmes, is going to be neutralized by Cardoso. And then their likely opponent in the Elite Eight, Notre Dame, at least they're favored by minus 3. They beat them in the first game of the year by 29 points. And you might say to me, yes, well, that was the first game of the year. Notre Dame has grown since then. Hannah Hidalgo was a nervous freshman, but she went off in that game, actually, as she went for 31 points on 10 of 21 shooting and 3 for 6 from three-point range. She had too many turnovers. I think she had 5 or 6 turnovers. And if anything, Notre Dame is now weaker up front because they are without Kylie Watson, their 6'4" post player. But South Carolina's march to the Final Four seems inevitable, as I don't see Texas, Gonzaga, or North Carolina or Stanford getting in their way. I think the most intriguing threat to them getting to the Final Four might be Oregon State, who I think could potentially upset Notre Dame, as they have a lot of interesting pieces. Like, they have Regan Beers, who could match up inside potentially with Cardoso. In addition, they have Tamia Gardner, who's another big at 6'3", and Kelsey Rees, the Australian, who is 6'5". So they have interesting parts as well. Their guard, Talia von Oelhoffen, she can go off at times. And to be clear, I'm not saying they are pulling the upset. I'm just saying if it winds up being a close game with Oregon State, with their coach, Scott Rueck, they have potential to pull the upset, in my opinion. The best team almost in the South Carolina side of the bracket. So yes, it appears I am making the argument for South Carolina, who is minus 150. But before we go any further, it is important that I self-report. Last year, around this time, I did a video where I said I would be taking South Carolina over Caitlin Clark. You can go look at it and make fun of me. I make the comparison of Hakeem Olajuwon versus David Robinson and how Boston was going to get revenge, as she would be seeking vengeance on Caitlin Clark, who won the Naismith's Most Valuable Player award, much like Hakeem Olajuwon sought vengeance on David Robinson when he got the MVP. Now, I have not even mentioned that South Carolina was minus 800. Lucky I knew better not to bet, and I did not lose a lot of money on that game. But it is interesting. I think that game is the reason that a lot of people have hesitations on South Carolina. But in that game, South Carolina shot a miserable 20% from the three-point line, going 4 for 20, which is often symbolized by Caitlin Clark waving off Raven Johnson when she's open for an outside shot. But in reality, Raven Johnson actually was their best three-point shooter in that game. She shot 50%, going 3 for 6. But this team that they have this year, South Carolina, is better than last year's because they gave up Boston, which they could afford to lose because they had Camilo Cardoso. And then they added what they needed, which was outside shooting with Te-Hina Paopao through the portal, who shoots a ridiculous 47% from the three-point line. But in addition to that, they still have Cardoso, who's 6'7" and dominating at center, but then spare parts. At power forward, they've got Watkins and Kitts. Kitts gives them an option, like a high-low option. She can shoot the outside shot, but Watkins can dominate inside so they can just feel how the game's going, decide what players to go with. And then at small forward, they have Bree Hall and Tessa Johnson. Tessa Johnson is getting more playing time as the season progresses, and she can shoot as well, as she's shooting 43% from the three-point line on 67 shots, but she is just getting better and better and a good option if Bree Hall is having an off game. In addition, we haven't even mentioned Malaysia Fulwiley, who gives the Gamecocks more explosion than they ever had last season. If she is feeling it, it is over. One thing that does make some nervous is this team is a bit young. They seem to drive Dawn Staley a bit crazy at times with their immaturity. She says that she and the coaches have just learned to tune out the team at times, but when it's time to focus, they can lock in. I think at times this team has had a bit of Milton Berle syndrome, just doing just enough to win. If you know, you know. But when all of their parts are on full display, it is unbelievably impressive. After UConn lost to South Carolina by 18, Gino Auriemma talked about the pressure that they could now put on teams from the outside that just made their inside game totally devastating. Now, some might point to the Tennessee game, but I would point to it as well and say how impressive it was. They even had a chance to win that game. They lost the three-point battle in that game, getting 4 less and shooting a low percentage at 26%. As well, they lost the free throw line battle as well, as Tennessee had 9 more free throws that they made than South Carolina, and they still somehow wound up winning that game. Thank you, refs, for missing the double dribble of Fulwiley, as well as Kelly Harper with that strategy at the last inbound. Don't even put a player in Cardoso's zip code. All right, I digress, but you get the point. I think South Carolina is great value at minus 150, but then again, I'm the guy that told you to get on South Carolina last year versus Iowa at minus 800, so take it with a grain of salt. Enjoy the game. Have a good night.